The dust rising from the wagon wheels settled on Grace Wilson's skin like a second layer of shame as she stood on the auction block in Spokane, Washington, her hands bound in front of her, her green eyes scanning the crowd of leering men who had gathered in the town square on this sweltering July afternoon in 1882. She had never imagined her life would come to this, standing like cattle to be sold to the highest bidder. But desperation and debt had a way of stripping away dignity faster than any prairie wind could strip leaves from trees. The auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth and a voice that carried across the dusty square, was calling out numbers while Grace fought to keep her chin up, to maintain some shred of the pride her mother had instilled in her before fever took her life 3 winters ago. "Do I hear 300? 300 for this fine specimen of womanhood, gentlemen. She is young, healthy, and strong enough to work a homestead." The auctioneer's words made Grace's stomach turn, but she kept her face carefully blank, refusing to give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had been traveling west with a wagon train when bandits attacked, killing most of the men and scattering the survivors. She had been found half dead by a trader who claimed she owed him for saving her life, and when she could not pay, he had brought her here, to this God-forsaken auction block where women were sold like property to settle debts. The crowd murmured and shifted, men in worn leather and dusty hats evaluating her like she was a horse they might purchase. Grace's heart pounded against her ribs as she searched for any face that might show kindness, but all she saw was hunger, greed, or cold indifference. Then her eyes landed on a man standing at the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes so blue they seemed to cut through the dust and heat like cold water from a mountain stream. He was not looking at her the way the others were. His jaw was set, his expression troubled, and his hands were clenched at his sides as though he was wrestling with some internal debate. 300. "Do I hear 350? The auctioneer called, and an older man with a scarred face and cruel eyes raised his hand. Grace felt ice run through her veins. She had heard the other women in the holding pen whispering about him, about how he worked his servants until they dropped and took liberties that no decent man would take. She could not go with him. She would rather throw herself from the auction block and break her neck on the hard-packed earth below. Just as the auctioneer was about to bring down his gavel, the tall man at the back pushed through the crowd, his boots striking the ground with purpose. 500, he said, his voice deep and steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd fell silent, turning to look at him. Grace stared, her breath catching in her throat. $500 was more money than most men in Spokane saw in a year. The auctioneer's eyes widened with greedy delight. 500. We have $500 from Mr. Ethan Irving. Do I hear 550? The auctioneer's gaze swept the crowd, but the scarred man shook his head and stepped back, his expression dark with anger. No one else spoke. 500 was too rich for their blood. The auctioneer waited a moment longer, milking the tension, then brought his gavel down with a sharp crack that seemed to seal Grace's fate. Sold to Mr. Irving for $500. Grace's knees nearly buckled as the crowd began to disperse. The auctioneer beckoned Ethan forward, and he approached the platform with long strides, pulling a worn leather pouch from his coat. He counted out the money with steady hands, his face revealing nothing, while Grace stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. Who was this man? What did he want with her? He had paid a fortune, more than she could ever hope to repay. The thought made her mouth go dry with fear. When the transaction was complete, the auctioneer cut the ropes binding her wrists, and Grace rubbed the raw skin, wincing. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Regret. Not for buying her, but for the fact that she had been for sale at all. "Come with me," he said quietly and turned away, clearly expecting her to follow. Grace hesitated only a moment before climbing down from the platform, her legs unsteady after standing for so long. She had no choice but to follow him, but as she walked behind him through the dusty streets of Spokane, she made herself a silent promise. She would find a way to repay this debt and earn her freedom, no matter what it took. Ethan led her to a sturdy chestnut horse tied outside the general store and untied the reins. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. Grace stared at his hand, calloused and strong, then up at his face. "Where are we going?" she asked, finding her voice at last. It came out hoarse from disuse and thirst. "My ranch, about an hour's ride north of town," he said simply. "You can ride behind me, or I can get you your own horse, but that will take time, and I would rather get out of this town as quickly as possible." There was something in his tone that suggested he liked Spokane about as much as she did at that moment. Grace made her decision and took his hand. His grip was firm but careful as he pulled her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to him, how solid and warm he felt in front of her. "Hold on," he said, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the muscles of his back through his shirt. He kicked the horse into a trot, and they left Spokane behind, heading north into the rolling hills that stretched toward the distant mountains. Grace did not look back. She kept her eyes forward, watching the landscape change from dusty streets to open grassland dotted with pine trees. The air grew cooler as they climbed, and she breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the clean scent of earth and growing things. They rode in silence for a long time, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of hooves on packed earth and the occasional call of a bird. Grace's mind raced with questions, but she did not know how to begin asking them. Finally, she could bear the silence no longer. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of their travel. Ethan did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Because no woman should be sold like property. Because I saw your face and knew you did not belong on that block. Because I had the money and the means to stop it." He paused, then added, "And because my father once told me that a man is measured not by how much he has, but by what he does with it." Grace absorbed his words, trying to read the truth in them. "What do you want from me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he had placed that bid. She felt him tense slightly in front of her. "Nothing that you are not willing to give," he said firmly. "I am not like those men back there. I paid your price so that you could be free." The words hung in the air between them, almost too good to be true. Grace wanted to believe him, but years of hardship had taught her to be cautious. "Nothing is free," she said softly. "There is always a cost." "Then let the cost be this," Ethan said. "You work at my ranch for a fair wage, same as I pay any hand. You earn your keep honestly, and when you have saved enough to go wherever you want to go, you are free to leave. No obligations beyond that." He glanced back over his shoulder at her, and she saw the sincerity in his blue eyes. "I give you my word as a man of honor." Grace felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She did not know if she could trust him yet, but she wanted to. She needed to. "I accept those terms," she said, and she felt him relax slightly, as though he had been holding his breath waiting for her answer. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Grace caught her breath at the sight. It was not grand, but it was well kept and beautiful in its simplicity. A sturdy log house sat nestled among a stand of pines, with a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings spread across a gentle valley. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see the glint of a stream running through the property. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "It is not much," Ethan said, misreading her silence for disappointment, "but it is honest work and honest living." "It is beautiful," Grace said, and she meant it. After months of hardship and uncertainty, the sight of this peaceful valley felt like a glimpse of heaven. Ethan guided the horse down the hill and into the yard, where a weathered man with silver hair emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. His eyes widened when he saw Grace sitting behind Ethan. "Well, I will be," the old man said, a grin spreading across his face. "You finally went and got yourself a wife, boy." "No, Samuel," Ethan said firmly as he dismounted and turned to help Grace down. His hands on her waist were gentle and steady. "This is Miss Grace Wilson. She will be working here as a ranch hand, same as you and me." "Miss Wilson, this is Samuel Harris. He has been with this ranch since before I was born." Samuel's expression sobered as he took in Grace's appearance, the dust on her clothes, the marks on her wrists. He was sharp enough to read between the lines. "Welcome to the Irving Ranch, Miss Wilson," he said with genuine warmth. "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here." "Thank you," Grace said, finding herself surprisingly moved by the old man's kindness. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with simple human decency. Ethan led her toward the house, and Samuel returned to his work in the barn, though she caught him watching them with obvious curiosity. The interior of the house was as neat as the exterior. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, and simple but well-made furniture. A hallway led to what Grace assumed were bedrooms. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone but took pride in his home. "There is a room in the back you can use," Ethan said, leading her down the hall. He pushed open a door to reveal a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the valley. "It is not fancy, but the roof does not leak and the bed is comfortable." Grace stepped into the room, running her hand over the smooth wood of the dresser. She had not had a room of her own in more than a year. "It is perfect," she whispered. Ethan nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. "There is a bathing room out back with a pump and a tub. I will heat some water for you so you can wash up. We eat at sundown, and tomorrow I will show you around the ranch and explain what needs doing." He paused in the doorway, his expression serious. "Miss Wilson, I meant what I said. You are safe here. No one will harm you or force you into anything you do not want. You have my word." "Thank you, Mr. Irving," Grace said, meeting his gaze, "for everything." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "We do not stand on ceremony around here." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving Grace alone in her new room. She sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long, shaking breath. For the first time since the attack on the wagon train, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had survived and what she had just escaped. Tears came then, hot and fast, and she did not try to stop them. She cried for her lost dreams, for her fear and humiliation, and finally, for the unexpected mercy of a blue-eyed cowboy who had paid $500 to set a stranger free. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Grace found both exhausting and strangely comforting. Ethan had not been lying when he said she would work as a ranch hand. He woke her before dawn that first morning, and she stumbled out of bed in the clothes he had left folded outside her door. Simple trousers and a shirt that must have belonged to him once, rolled up at the sleeves and cinched with a belt. She felt strange wearing men's clothing, but Ethan had explained matter-of-factly that skirts were impractical for ranch work, and she would break her neck trying to ride in one. He taught her how to feed the cattle, how to mend fence lines, how to muck out the barn and groom the horses. Samuel showed her how to milk the cows and collect eggs from the chickens that scratched around the yard. The work was hard, and her muscles ached in ways she had never experienced, but there was a satisfaction in it that surprised her. At the end of each day, she could see what she had accomplished. The fence was mended, the animals were fed, the barn was clean. It was honest work, as Ethan had promised, and slowly, day by day, Grace felt a sense of purpose returning to her life. Ethan was a good teacher, patient but firm, never condescending but never coddling either. He treated her exactly as he had promised, as a ranch hand earning her keep. But Grace noticed other things too. The way he always made sure she had the lighter tasks when he saw her struggling. The way he left extra biscuits on her plate at meals. The way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. Not with the hunger she had seen in the men at the auction, but with something else, something that made her heart beat faster when she caught him at it. Samuel was a font of information, always ready with a story or a piece of advice. Over meals, he told her about the ranch, how Ethan's father had built it from nothing, and how Ethan had taken it over when his father passed 5 years ago. Lost his mother when he was just a boy, Samuel said one evening as they sat around the table after supper. His father raised him right, though, taught him that strength means nothing if you do not use it to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Is that why he bought me? Grace asked softly. Ethan had gone out to check on the cattle, leaving her alone with Samuel. The old man looked at her with kind eyes. Ethan has a good heart, maybe too good for his own sake sometimes, Samuel said. But I think when he saw you up there, he saw his mother. She died of fever when Ethan was 10, but before that, there was a time when his father fell on hard times. They almost lost everything. His mother worked herself to the bone to keep the family together, took in washing and mending, whatever she could do. Ethan remembers what it is like to be desperate, to be at the mercy of circumstances beyond your control. He could not save his mother, but I reckon he figured he could save you. Grace absorbed this information, understanding Ethan a little better. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she found herself thinking about him in ways she had not allowed herself to think about any man in a long time. She thought about the strength in his hands when he showed her how to hold the reins properly. The sound of his laugh when she made a joke over breakfast. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She tried to push the thoughts away, reminding herself that she was here to work to earn her freedom, nothing more. But her heart, traitorous thing that it was, had other ideas. 2 weeks after her arrival, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing wind and rain that lashed the valley with fury. Ethan and Samuel worked frantically to get the cattle into shelter and secure the buildings. Grace helped as best she could, her clothes soaked through within minutes, her hair plastered to her face. They were checking the barn when they heard a sharp crack, and Grace looked up to see part of the roof beginning to sag, the old wood giving way under the assault of wind and water. "Get out!" Ethan shouted, but Grace was frozen, staring at the collapsing beam above her. She did not see Ethan move, did not realize he had crossed the barn until he slammed into her, knocking her out of the way. They tumbled together into a pile of hay as the beam crashed down where Grace had been standing moments before, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. For a moment, they lay tangled together, both breathing hard. Then Ethan pushed himself up on his arms, looking down at her with wild eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her shoulders and arms, checking for injury. "I am fine," Grace gasped, her heart pounding from the near miss and from the sudden awareness of how close they were, how his body was pressed against hers, warm despite the cold rain. "You saved me." "I could not let you get hurt," Ethan said, his voice rough. He was still looking at her with that intensity that made her breath catch. Rain dripped from his hair onto her face, and she saw something shift in his expression, something raw and unguarded. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Samuel's voice called from outside, breaking the spell. "You two alive in there?" Ethan pulled away, helping Grace to her feet with hands that shook slightly. "We are fine," he called back, but his eyes never left Grace's face. She could still feel the imprint of his body against hers, the strength of his arms around her. Something had changed between them in that moment, something neither of them could name but both could feel humming in the air like lightning before a strike. That night, after the storm had passed and the damage had been assessed, Grace sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket while her clothes dried. Ethan sat across from her, his own hair still damp, staring into the flames. Samuel had gone to bed, leaving them alone in the quiet house. "You could have been killed," Ethan said suddenly, his voice low. "I should have checked that roof before the storm hit. I knew it was weak in places." "It was not your fault," Grace said, "and you saved me. Again." She smiled at him, trying to lighten the mood, but Ethan did not smile back. He looked troubled, his jaw tight. "I seem to be making a habit of that," he said. Then he looked at her, and the expression in his eyes made her heart flip over in her chest. "Grace, I need to tell you something." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Grace waited, barely breathing. "When I bought you at that auction, I told myself it was just the right thing to do. That I was helping someone in need the way my father taught me, and that was true at first." He paused, running a hand through his damp hair. "But these past 2 weeks, having you here, working beside you, watching you learn and grow stronger every day, I realized that I was lying to myself." "What do you mean?" Grace asked, though her heart was beginning to understand before her mind did. "I mean that somewhere between teaching you to ride and watching you laugh at Samuel's terrible jokes, I started to care about you," Ethan said, the words tumbling out now as though a dam had broken. "Not as a ranch hand or someone I saved, but as a woman I admire and respect and, God help me, have feelings for." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I know I have no right to say any of this. I know you probably see me as your employer or worse, as the man who owns your debt. But I cannot keep pretending anymore, not after today, not after I thought I might lose you." Grace stood too, her blanket falling away, and crossed to him. She put her hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Ethan, look at me." He turned, and she saw vulnerability in his face that took her breath away. This strong, capable man who had saved her twice now was afraid of his own feelings, afraid of hers. "You do not own my debt. You paid it so I could be free. And these past 2 weeks I have been free, freer than I have been in longer than I can remember. Not just because I have work and a place to stay, but because of how you treat me, with respect and kindness, and yes, with something more. Grace," he breathed her name like a prayer. "I have feelings for you too," she said, the confession spilling out before she could think better of it. "I tried not to. I told myself it was gratitude or relief or just the circumstances throwing us together. But it is more than that. When you look at me, I feel seen. When you smile, I feel warm. And when that beam almost crushed me today and you saved me, all I could think was that I could not bear the thought of never seeing you again." Ethan reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I do not want you to feel obligated," he said. "If you have feelings for me, I need to know they are real, not something born out of gratitude or feeling like you owe me." "I do not feel obligated," Grace said firmly. She covered his hands with hers. "I feel grateful, yes, but that is not why my heart races when you are near. That is not why I find myself watching for you in the mornings, or why I lie awake at night thinking about you. These feelings are mine, freely given, no debts attached." The last of Ethan's restraint crumbled. He pulled her to him and kissed her, and Grace felt the world tilt and realign around that single point of contact. His lips were warm and firm against hers, and she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past 2 weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to court you properly," he said. "I am going to take you to town dances and buy you pretty things and treat you the way a woman should be treated. I am going to earn your love honestly." "You already have," Grace whispered, and kissed him again. The next few months were the happiest of Grace's life. True to his word, Ethan courted her with old-fashioned determination. He took her into Spokane for the summer festival, where they danced under the stars, and he won her a ribbon at the shooting competition. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and taught her to fish in the stream that ran through the property. He introduced her to the neighboring ranchers and their families, never once letting anyone make her feel less than welcome. Despite the whispers about where she had come from, Grace blossomed under his attention and under the steady, honest work of the ranch. Her hands grew calloused but capable. Her skin tanned from long days in the sun. She learned to ride well enough to help with the cattle drives, and Samuel declared her the best hand with the chickens he had ever seen. She felt strong and capable and, for the first time in her life, truly valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. But it was not just Ethan's courtship that made her happy. It was the life they were building together, the easy partnership that developed between them. They worked side by side during the day and sat together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the herd and maybe start breeding horses. Grace told him about her childhood in Boston, about her parents and the life she had left behind when she headed west seeking adventure. They learned each other's stories, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the scars. Samuel watched it all with the satisfied air of a man who had orchestrated something brilliant, though both Ethan and Grace insisted he had nothing to do with it. "I am just saying," Samuel would say with a twinkle in his eye, "that I am the one who suggested you go into town that day, Ethan. If it were not for me, you might never have seen that auction. If it were not for you, I might have had more peace and quiet," Ethan would reply, but he would be smiling and Grace would laugh, and the three of them would settle into the comfortable banter that marked their evenings together. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan took Grace on a ride up into the mountains. They packed a picnic and spent the day exploring the high meadows where the air was thin and cold, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. They stopped beside a crystal-clear lake that reflected the mountains like a mirror, and Ethan spread a blanket on the grass. They ate in comfortable silence, watching an eagle circle overhead. Then Ethan turned to Grace, and she saw that he was nervous, his fingers drumming against his knee. "Grace, there is something I want to ask you," he said. Her heart began to pound, hope and anticipation rising in her chest. "What is it?" she asked, though she thought she knew, prayed she knew. Ethan took her hand in his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "These past months with you have been the best of my life. You have brought light and laughter back to the ranch, back to me. I cannot imagine my days without you in them. I do not want to imagine them." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the sunlight and threw tiny rainbows across her hand. "Grace Wilson, I love you. Not because I saved you or because of any debt or obligation, but because you are brave and strong and kind and beautiful inside and out. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in this life, not just on the ranch but in everything? Will you let me spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Tears streamed down Grace's face as she threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she sobbed. Yes, 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 I love you, Ethan Irving, with all my heart. I will marry you. Ethan kissed her then, long and deep and full of promise, and when they broke apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her, though he confessed later that he had guessed at the size and spent 3 anxious weeks worrying it would be too big or too small. They lay back on the blanket together, Grace's head on Ethan's shoulder, and watched the clouds drift across the blue sky. "When did you know?" Grace asked. "When did you know you loved me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I think I knew the moment I saw you on that auction block," he said slowly. "Something in me recognized something in you. But I knew for certain the day of the storm, when I thought I might lose you. The fear I felt in that moment told me everything I needed to know about how much you meant to me." "I knew the night you told me I was safe," Grace said. "No one had ever made me feel that way before, truly safe, not just from danger but safe to be myself. That is when I started falling in love with you, though I did not want to admit it at first." "Why not?" Ethan asked, turning to look at her. "Because I was afraid," Grace admitted. "Afraid it was not real, afraid you would change your mind, afraid I would wake up and find out it was all a dream and I was still standing on that auction block." "This is real," Ethan said firmly, tightening his arm around her. "I promise you, Grace, this is real, and I am never letting you go." They were married on a clear October day with the mountains standing witness and the valley dressed in its autumn finest. Samuel stood up as Ethan's best man, and Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch served as Grace's matron of honor. The ceremony was held in the small church in Spokane, and half the town turned out, curious about the mysterious woman who had won the heart of one of their most eligible bachelors. If anyone remembered where Grace had come from, they were kind enough not to mention it. She stood before the altar in a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, her hair crowned with wildflowers, and promised to love, honor, and cherish Ethan for all the days of her life. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt tears spring to her eyes again. They walked out of the church hand in hand to a shower of rice and well wishes, and climbed into a decorated wagon for the ride back to the ranch, where Samuel had organized a celebration that lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and Grace looked around at the smiling faces of their friends and neighbors and felt a happiness so complete it was almost painful. That night, alone in their bedroom, Ethan carried her over the threshold like she weighed nothing, and they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and clinging to each other in the darkness. Afterwards, Grace lay with her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. She was loved. She was wanted. She was home. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in the Washington Territory could be, but Grace and Ethan weathered it together, their love keeping them warm even when the snow piled high and the wind howled down from the mountains. They spent the long evenings by the fire, planning for the spring and the future they would build together. Ethan taught Grace to read the land, to predict weather patterns and know when the cattle would need extra feed. Grace taught Ethan the songs her mother had sung to her as a child, and sometimes in the evenings they would sing together, while Samuel played a battered fiddle he pulled out of storage. When spring came and the snow melted and the valley burst into green life again, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one morning as they stood watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. For a moment he just stared at her, as though he could not quite believe what she had said. Then he let out a whoop of joy that sent the chickens scattering and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down carefully as though she might break. "Grace, we are going to have a baby." "I know," she said, smiling at his obvious delight. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ethan said, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her soundly. "You have given me everything, Grace. A reason to get up in the morning, a partner to share my life with, and now this, a child. I feel like the richest man alive." Samuel was equally thrilled when they told him, and he immediately began constructing a cradle from pine wood, his gnarled hands moving with surprising delicacy as he carved animals and flowers into the sides. Grace's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer, though the heat made her uncomfortable, and Ethan fussed over her like a mother hen, refusing to let her do any heavy work despite her protests that she was pregnant, not made of glass. As her belly grew round with their child, Grace would sometimes catch Ethan watching her with such an expression of wonder on his face that it made her heart ache. "What are you thinking?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Ethan said, reaching over to place his hand on her swollen stomach. The baby kicked against his palm, and his face lit up with joy. "I am thinking about how different my life would be if I had not gone into town that day, if I had not seen you on that auction block. I am thinking that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things, if we have the courage to act when it matters." "I think about that too," Grace said softly. "Standing on that block was the most terrifying experience of my life, but if I had not been there, I would never have met you. I would never have known this kind of love, this kind of happiness. It is strange how fate works, is it not?" "Fate, providence, dumb luck," Ethan said with a smile. "I do not care what we call it. I am just grateful for it." Their son was born on a crisp November evening as the first snow of the season began to fall. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan paced the hallway outside their bedroom with his heart in his throat, listening to Grace's cries and feeling helpless. But Mrs. Henderson, who served as midwife, was experienced and capable, and when the baby's first cry split the air, Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom with a bundle in her arms and a tired smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Irving. A healthy, strong boy with a fine set of lungs on him." Ethan took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny, red-faced creature who had already stopped crying and was blinking up at him with unfocused blue eyes. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, and then, more urgently, "Grace." "Is Grace all right?" "She is tired but well," Mrs. Henderson assured him. "You can go in and see her now." Ethan carried his son into the bedroom where Grace lay propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "Is that him?" she asked, holding out her arms. Ethan placed the baby carefully into her embrace and sat on the edge of the bed beside them, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "He is beautiful," Grace said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at their son. "Look at him, Ethan. We made this perfect little person." "What should we name him?" Ethan asked, stroking the baby's downy dark hair with one finger. Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "What was your father's name?" "Daniel," Ethan said, surprised. "Daniel Irving." "Then let us call him Daniel," Grace said. "After the man who raised you to be the kind of person who would save a stranger, who would give her freedom and respect and love. Let us name him after the man who made you who you are." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, and he kissed Grace's forehead. "Daniel Irving it is," he said. "May he grow up to be half the man his grandfather was, and may he always know how much he is loved." Little Daniel was a good baby, healthy and alert, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Samuel doted on him shamelessly, carving him toys and singing him songs in a creaky voice that made the baby smile. Ethan was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with Daniel when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching his son sleep with an expression of pure wonder on his face. Grace recovered her strength quickly, and by the time spring returned to the valley, she was back helping with the ranch work, though now she carried Daniel in a sling against her chest while she collected eggs and tended the garden. The sight of her with their son never failed to move Ethan deeply. She had been meant to be a mother, he thought, watching her sing softly to Daniel as she worked. She had been meant for this life, for this family, for him. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, and Ethan was able to expand the herd and start the horse breeding program he had dreamed about. Grace proved to have a gift with horses, a gentle way of handling them that won their trust quickly. She trained several of the young colts to saddle, and word spread about the quality of Irving horses. People came from as far as Seattle to buy their stock, and the extra income allowed them to make improvements to the house and the outbuildings. Daniel grew into a bright, active toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's smile. He learned to walk by clinging to the fence rails and watching the cattle, and his first word was horse, much to Ethan's delight and Grace's mock dismay. When he was 2 years old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again, and this time the whole process felt less frightening, more like a natural continuation of their growing family. Their daughter was born on a warm June day, and they named her Marie after Grace's mother. She had Grace's green eyes and a head full of dark curls, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Ethan, who had always prided himself on being strong and practical, turned into a complete fool over his daughter, unable to deny her anything when she looked up at him with those big green eyes. Samuel lived to see both children born, though his health began to fail in the years after Marie's birth. He spent his final days sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, watching Daniel and Marie play in the yard and telling them stories about the old days. When he passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night, the whole family mourned him deeply. They buried him on the ranch, under a big pine tree that overlooked the valley, and Ethan carved a headstone that read, "Samuel Harris, faithful friend and honorary grandfather." Grace stood beside Ethan at the funeral, holding Marie while Daniel clung to his father's leg, and she thought about how much her life had changed since that terrible day in Spokane. She had been saved by a good man, a man who had seen her worth when she was at her lowest point. She had found love and built a family, and created a life that was rich with meaning and purpose. And though there had been hard times and losses along the way, she would not trade any of it for the world. As the children grew, Grace and Ethan made sure they understood where their mother had come from and what their father had done. They did not hide the truth or dress it up with pretty lies. When Daniel was 8 years old enough to understand, they sat him down and told him about the auction block, about the day Ethan had paid $500 to set Grace free. Daniel listened solemnly, his young face serious. When they were finished, he looked at his mother with eyes that were wise beyond his years. "So Papa saved you," he said. "Yes," Grace agreed. "He saved me, and then you fell in love," this from Marie, who was 6 and already romantic at heart. "Yes," Ethan said, smiling at his daughter. "We fell in love. Will you save someone someday, Papa?" Daniel asked. "Like you saved Mama." Ethan exchanged a look with Grace, and she saw the emotion in his eyes. "I hope you will save people, son," Ethan said. "Not necessarily from auction blocks, but from loneliness, from fear, from despair." I hope I teach you that being strong means using that strength to protect others, to lift them up, to give them hope when they have none." "I will try, Papa," Daniel said earnestly, and Grace felt her heart swell with pride. This was their legacy, she thought. Not just the ranch or the land or the prosperity they had built, but the values they were passing on to their children. The belief that every person had worth and dignity. The understanding that love and kindness were more powerful than any amount of money or status. The knowledge that one person, acting with courage and compassion, could change another person's entire life. The years continued to roll by, marked by seasons and celebrations, by hard work and occasional heartbreak. Daniel grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch and had his father's gift with cattle and his mother's way with horses. Marie became a spirited, intelligent girl who could ride as well as any cowboy and had strong opinions about everything. They were both educated, as Grace and Ethan believed firmly in the value of learning, and they could read and write and do figures better than most adults in the territory. When Daniel was 16 and Marie 14, Ethan took them into Spokane for the summer festival. They walked through the town square and Ethan paused at a certain spot, his children on either side of him. "This is where I first saw your mother," he said quietly. "Right here." She was standing on an auction block, and I knew I could not walk away and let her be sold to someone who would not treat her right. Daniel and Marie looked at the spot with new understanding. "Were you scared, Papa?" Marie asked. "Terrified," Ethan admitted. $500 was most of what I had saved. I did not know if I was doing the right thing, if your mother would accept my help, if she would be safe with me. But I knew I had to try. "And it all worked out," Daniel said. "It did," Ethan agreed. "But that is not the point of the story. The point is that doing the right thing is often scary. It often costs us something, whether it is money or comfort or security. But we do it anyway, because our worth as people is measured not by what we have, but by what we are willing to give for others." Grace watched her family from a few steps away, her heart full to bursting. She thought about the terrified young woman she had been, standing in this very spot, certain that her life was over. She thought about the courage it had taken Ethan to step forward and bid on her, to take a chance on a stranger. She thought about all the days and nights that had followed, the laughter and tears, the triumphs and struggles, the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones. And she knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That evening, back at the ranch, Grace and Ethan sat on the porch as they had done 1,000 times before, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside doing their evening chores, their voices and laughter drifting through the open windows. Ethan took Grace's hand, and she laced her fingers through his, noting the way their hands fit together perfectly after all these years. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Spending all that money on me. You could have used it to buy more land, more cattle. You could have had an easier life." Ethan turned to her, and the love in his eyes was as strong and clear as it had been the day he proposed to her beside that mountain lake. "I have never regretted it for a single moment," he said firmly. "That $500 was the best investment I ever made. It bought me you, and you brought me more wealth than any amount of land or cattle ever could. You brought me love, laughter, partnership, family. You brought me life, Grace. Real, full, beautiful life." Grace leaned against his shoulder, feeling the strength and warmth of him, the solid reality of this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I love you, Ethan Irving," she whispered. "I love you too, Grace Irving," he whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, and the first stars began to appear. Inside, Daniel and Marie were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to wash the dishes. Somewhere in the valley, cattle lowed softly, settling down for the night. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was an ordinary evening on an ordinary day, and it was everything. As the years continued their steady march forward, the Irving family remained a cornerstone of the community around Spokane. Daniel eventually married a local girl named Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and they built a home on the eastern edge of the Irving property. They gave Grace and Ethan 3 grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl, who ran wild across the ranch with the same joy and freedom their father had known. Marie, ever independent, chose a different path. She went to Seattle to study teaching and returned 3 years later with a degree and a husband, a quiet, bookish man named Thomas, who wrote for a newspaper and loved her fierce spirit. Grace and Ethan grew older together, their hair turning silver, their faces becoming lined with the marks of time and weather and laughter. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex with each passing year. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with a look across a crowded room, moved together with the ease of long practice. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Grace back to the lake in the mountains where he had proposed. They were both in their early 40s now, their children grown, their grandchildren beginning to fill the spaces those children had left. They spread a blanket in the same spot, and Grace laughed at how romantic Ethan still was, how he still courted her after all these years. "Do you remember what you asked me here?" Grace said, looking out over the crystal water. "I asked if you would marry me," Ethan said, "and thank God you said yes." "I would say yes again," Grace told him, turning to meet his eyes. "Every day I would say yes again." Ethan kissed her, and it was sweet and familiar and still sent a thrill through her. "I would ask again," he said. "Every day I would ask again." They lay back on the blanket just as they had 2 decades before and watched the clouds drift across the sky. Grace thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and pain and ultimate redemption. She thought about all the women who had not been as lucky as she was, who had not had an Ethan Irving to step forward and change their fate. She had tried, over the years, to help when she could. She had opened her home to women in need, had spoken against the injustices that allowed people to be bought and sold like property. It was not enough, could never be enough, but it was something. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, as he had asked her 1,000 times before. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Grace said honestly, "and how much I wish every woman could find what I found in you." "I wish I could save them all," Ethan said quietly, "but I could only save one, and I am grateful every day that the one I saved was you." As they moved into their 50s, Ethan began to slow down, not dramatically but noticeably. His knee, which he had injured in a fall years ago, ached on cold mornings. He could not work the long hours he once had, though he still rose before dawn and did his part. Grace, too, felt the years, though she remained strong and capable. She still worked the garden, still trained the horses, though she left the heavy lifting to Daniel and the ranch hands they now employed. They talked often about the future, about what would happen when they were gone. Daniel would inherit the ranch. They had decided, as he loved the land with the same passion Ethan did. Marie and her family would receive a generous portion as well, enough to keep them comfortable, and to help support the school she had started in Spokane for children whose families could not afford traditional education. But more than land or money, Grace and Ethan wanted to leave their children and grandchildren the legacy of their love, the example of 2 people who had chosen each other every day and built something beautiful from that choice. On a warm summer evening when Ethan was 56 and Grace 54, they gathered the whole family together for a celebration. All the children and grandchildren were there, filling the house with noise and laughter. After dinner, as the sun began to set and the children ran outside to play, Ethan stood and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, and the room fell quiet. Grace looked at him from across the table, wondering what he was up to. 26 years ago, I walked into Spokane and saw a woman on an auction block. I did not know her name, did not know her story, but I knew I could not walk away. I paid $500 to set her free, and in doing so, I found my own freedom. I found love, partnership, purpose, and family. Everything good in my life came from that one decision." He looked at Grace, and she saw tears in his eyes. "But more than that, I learned that love is not something that just happens to you. It is something you choose every single day." I chose to love Grace that day in Spokane, and I have chosen to love her every day since. And she has chosen to love me back, which is the greatest gift I could ever receive. Grace stood and went to him, taking his hand. "You saved me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we saved each other. You gave me freedom and love, and I gave you the same. We built this life together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice, and I would not change a single moment of it." They kissed, and their family cheered, and the evening dissolved into music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by the people you love most in the world. Later, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Grace and Ethan sat on the porch in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "You think they understand?" Grace asked. "Do you think they know how lucky we are to have found what we found?" "I think they do," Ethan said. "And if they do not yet, they will. Love is a lesson that takes a lifetime to learn, but we have given them a good start." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and held on tight through everything life threw at them. The stars came out one by one, and a cool breeze whispered through the pines, and the world turned on its axis, carrying them forward into whatever came next. The final years of their story were gentle ones. Ethan's health began to fail more noticeably in his early 60s, though he fought against the limitations his body imposed with stubborn determination. Grace was his constant companion, nursing him through bouts of illness with the same fierce love she had always shown. She read to him in the evenings, walked with him when he was able, and held his hand through the difficult days. When Ethan was 63, he had a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. The doctors said he would likely never walk again, but Ethan, with Grace's help and encouragement, proved them wrong. It took months of painful, frustrating work, but eventually he was able to get around with a cane, though he could no longer do the physical labor the ranch required. He hated the weakness, hated being dependent, but Grace would not let him wallow in self-pity. "You saved me once," she told him firmly when he was in a particularly dark mood. "Now let me save you. Let me be your strength when yours fails. That is what partners do, Ethan. We carry each other." And she did carry him, through the difficult recovery, through the adjustment to his new limitations, through the dark moments when he wondered if his life had any purpose anymore. She reminded him daily of his worth, of all he had accomplished, of the family he had built and the lives he had touched. She reminded him that he was loved, not for what he could do, but for who he was. Gradually, Ethan found a new equilibrium. He could not work the ranch anymore, but he could advise Daniel, could teach his grandchildren, could sit on the porch and watch the valley he loved change with the seasons. And most importantly, he could be with Grace, which had always been the greatest joy of his life. They spent their days together, talking and laughing and sometimes just sitting in silence, enjoying each other's presence. On a crisp October morning when Ethan was 68 and Grace 66, they woke to find the valley covered in the first frost of the season. Ethan had been feeling poorly the day before, but he seemed better this morning, more alert and peaceful. They had breakfast together, just the two of them, as the sunrise painted the mountains gold. "You remember the day we met?" Ethan asked, buttering a piece of toast with slightly shaky hands. "I remember every detail," Grace said. "The heat, the dust, the fear. And then you, stepping forward like an answer to a prayer I had not even known how to pray." "Best day of my life," Ethan said with a smile, "even though I did not know it at the time. I thought I was just doing the right thing, but I was actually finding my future." "We found each other," Grace corrected gently. "We chose each other, and we have been choosing each other ever since." They finished breakfast and moved to the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. Grace sat in her chair and Ethan in his, but they held hands across the space between them, fingers intertwined. The valley spread out before them, the ranch they had built together, the home they had made. Their family was scattered now, Daniel working the far pasture, Marie in town teaching, the grandchildren pursuing their own dreams, but Grace and Ethan could feel their presence, the legacy they had created. "I love you, Grace," Ethan said softly, his eyes on the mountains. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you beyond my last breath." "I love you too," Grace said, her throat tight with emotion. "You are my heart, Ethan Irving, you always have been." They sat together in peaceful silence as the sun climbed higher and the frost began to melt, sparkling like diamonds in the grass. And somewhere in that quiet morning, Ethan's hand slowly relaxed in Grace's, his breathing becoming shallow and then still. Grace felt the change, the moment when his spirit left his body and she held his hand tighter, tears streaming down her face. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." The family gathered for Ethan's funeral, and half of Spokane turned out to pay their respects to a man who had lived his life with integrity and kindness. They buried him beside Samuel, under the pine trees with a headstone that read Ethan Irving, beloved husband, father, and friend. He lived as he loved, with courage and compassion. Grace stood at the graveside supported by Daniel and Marie, and she did not break down, though her heart was shattered. She had been blessed with 46 years of love, and she would not dishonor that by collapsing now. In the weeks and months that followed, Grace grieved deeply but not desperately. She missed Ethan with an ache that never fully went away, but she also felt his presence in everything around her. In the ranch they had built, in the children they had raised, in the memories that filled every corner of the house. She continued to live on the ranch, helping where she could, spoiling her grandchildren and telling them stories about their grandfather. 3 years after Ethan's death, Grace was sitting on the porch on a warm summer evening when she felt a pain in her chest. It was not sharp or frightening, just a gentle pressure, a sense of something ending. She looked out over the valley, at the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she smiled. "I am coming, my love," she whispered. "Wait for me." Daniel found her there an hour later, sitting peacefully in her chair with a smile on her face, her eyes fixed on the mountains. She was 71 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life filled with love and purpose. They buried her beside Ethan, and on her headstone they carved Grace Irving, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She was saved by love and in turn saved others. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations. Daniel's children worked it, and then their children. each generation adding their own mark but always remembering the story of how it all began. The story of an auction block in Spokane, of a cowboy who had the courage to step forward and pay a woman's price to set her free, and of the love that had bloomed from that single act of courage. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that one person could make a difference, that love was always worth fighting for, and that the choices we make in moments of crisis can echo down through the years, shaping not just our own lives but the lives of generations to come. Years turned into decades, and the world changed around the Irving ranch. The Wild West became less wild, towns grew into cities, and the frontier life that Ethan and Grace had known faded into history. But the ranch remained, a testament to their love and their legacy. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the mountains and the valley filled with golden light, those who knew the story said you could still feel their presence there. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other with a devotion that transcended even death. The auction block was no place for a lady, and the cowboy had paid her price and set her free. But what came after that beautiful life they built together? That was something they created themselves, choice by choice, day by day, with courage and compassion and an unwavering commitment to each other. It was a love story for the ages, and it all began with one man's decision to step forward when he could have walked away, and one woman's decision to trust when she had every reason not to. Together, they proved that love could heal the deepest wounds, that freedom was worth any price, and that two people, united in purpose and passion, could build something that would last forever.